In the United States where I live, there's something called separation of church and state. And of course, the schools are owned and operated by the state, so there's no religion in schools. But there's a loophole. So we're going to talk about religious schools today. And I've got some good news. I brought in Godless Engineer to help me talk about it.
What's up, heathens? And thank you, Telltale, for allowing me to come onto your channel and give my 2 cents.
Anytime, old buddy. Let's get into it. Religion has to be completely separated from schools in the US. It's much like courthouses or public parks, where if a Christian tries to erect a statue of the Ten Commandments or something, which, being a graven image, is hilarious for all kinds of reasons, the state has to give the right to erect statues representing any religion in the same location. Lucky for us, we have groups like the Satanic Temple who have the resources and will to fight in court for the right to put a Baphomet statue right next to the Ten Commandments statues. Much as many groups hate that fact, it's that law that protects their religious freedom to do whatever they want and not have to worry about another group coming in and taking over. So schools are held to the same standards as any other government-sponsored program or property. They aren't allowed to endorse one religion over another. This actually results in some interesting workarounds. They won't have Christmas break, they'll have winter break. It'll just be right at Christmas time. They won't have Christmas dances, they'll have snowballs. I know, clever name, right? But every now and then, they'll brazenly break the law because they assume that every one of their students is a Christian with Christian parents. Unfortunately for them, I am not. So I've been watching very closely, waiting for them to do something stupid, at which point I've been planning on starting a phone call campaign to the Board of Education. They've made a few mistakes in the past, but nothing to warrant unleashing the wrath of 20,000 subscribers on them. I hope you guys will be there if I do need you though. She has 9 years of school left. We'll see what happens. That being said, there are some kids who aren't as lucky. One solid way people have found to sidestep the laws against religion in public schools is by starting their own private schools. You can say anything you want there, almost anything at all, as long as it's a religious conviction. Godless Engineer, you went to Catholic school, didn't you? I was hoping you could tell us the 3 worst things about it.
Well, yes, Telltale, I did go to a Catholic private school up until the 4th grade. Now, my experience doesn't exactly match the experiences of other people that have gone to Christian private schools. One of the things that I really hated about my time in the Catholic private school is, of course, the uniforms. A lot of people don't like the uniforms. To me, it represents a lot of the conformist ideology that exists within Christianity and religion in general. I mean, basically what I had to pick from was either mustard, ketchup, or cum. 3 colors were all that we had to pick from. And I really hated that going to school there. Not just because, I can't exactly express myself through clothing, but because of the conformist ideals that it really ingrains into you, which leads into the next reason why I don't really like Catholic private schools. The religious indoctrination of children is also another thing that really grates on me. Thinking back to it, I was heavily indoctrinated by my Catholic private school. For one thing, we had religious studies that went on during school hours, which is fine because it was a private school, but we also had to go to Mass twice every week. It's no surprise that, at a young age, I felt that a belief in God was just innate to people, that it was just the norm, and I didn't want to go against the norm, so I didn't really question my faith or anything like that until much, much later. But this conformity and religious indoctrination really combine together to create the third problem that I have with religious institutions or Catholic private schools or anything like that. And that's the predatory nature of the people that usually come to work there. I don't know if you guys have seen The Keepers on Netflix, but basically it chronicles the investigation into a nun that was murdered. And she was murdered by other priests that worked at the school that she was at, a Catholic private school. Because these priests were sexually abusing the girls that went to this all-girls Catholic private school. They had their hands all deep inside of the police department and inside our government, and they were allowed to continue this abuse for years and years. And Like in The Keepers, the one nun that tried to speak out and actually stop it, she was killed for that. This isn't only to that one specific case either. Since the spotlight feature on the predatory nature of pedophiles in the Catholic Church, many, many more rings of pedophiles have been discovered to operate within the Catholic Church in different cities and in different countries.
That's true. One might be inclined to think that it's an isolated incident, and I can understand that. It's a horrific thing, and people don't want to believe that society is really like that all the time. And it's true, it isn't like that all the time. But there are pockets of people with certain shared mindsets that allow them to justify horrific behavior. And not only does it allow them to justify that behavior, but as with Jehovah's Witnesses, it drives people to hide it when it's discovered. They don't want the secular government involved in church business, or they think the events are blown out of proportion. It wasn't really as bad as they're making it out to be. But ultimately, there's no excuse or justification for something like that, and the Catholic Church has been acting as a shield to protect these people from prosecution, just as the Jehovah's Witnesses have been.
All of this is because of the vulnerable nature of kids that attend these types of institutions. The way that these religious schools want us to conform to a certain perspective or a certain ideology, obviously, that really compels people to not step out of line and speak up against any of these priests or church officials that do sexually abuse kids. The religious indoctrination teaches them that God is placed above all others and is not to be questioned. So when your priest, the mouthpiece for God here on earth, tells you to take off your pants and allow him to rape you, it doesn't really click in your mind that this is wrong and it shouldn't be happening. Because you've been indoctrinated to believe that these people are trusted by God and that they are just people and they are blessed by God and all this holiness. It doesn't ever occur to you that this is wrong. Luckily, though, some people do know that it's wrong. And that's what I hate most, is that it allows people to hide behind religion in these cases. In the case of priests that are sexually assaulting and abusing young children who are vulnerable and who are looking to be accepted, especially by a priest or someone in authority. Now, I wasn't molested or abused like that when I was in Catholic private school. But all that I can think of now is that I was one of the lucky ones that didn't. That I just so happened to go to a specific school where that, to my knowledge, didn't happen. But there's always that thing in the back of my mind that says that I don't know that it didn't happen. And I don't know if anybody was abused by anybody that I used to go to school with or was taught by. So I hope this opened your eyes a little bit as to the Catholic private schools and at least how I feel about it. I would love to know what you feel about it down in the comments below.
Here are some of the regulations with regards to public schools in my state, quoting from the State Regulation of Private Schools document from the Department of Education. No requirements for accreditation, which means they don't have to get a certification saying they're qualified to run a school. They can just put up a building and start enrolling kids. No vetting of any kind. Registration is optional. They may register with the state superintendent of schools if they want. If a school registers to operate, it has to administer a comprehensive test of basic skills on an annual basis. But as I said, this is 100% optional. And outside of the annual test, no other provisions apply. There are also no requirements for licensing. Approval is optional, but you have to get approval to exempt kids from school, so they're going to want to get approval to operate from the local Board of Education. If they do get approval, though, as I said before, they don't need to be accredited, licensed, or registered in any way. They just say or do what they want in class. They are not required to provide factual information, and they can still be an approved school in this state. There's a curriculum to which they must adhere. Among other things, they have to provide at least 1 year of instruction in state history before completion of 8th grade. What's said in that history class is more or less up to the school. they also have to have some civics courses, which is basically teaching how our political system operates. The state is legally required to provide transportation, textbooks, special ed, and a few other things at the public's expense, so the private school will receive grants and things to cover the cost of some of that stuff. Now let's talk about homeschooling. I was actually homeschooled from 7th grade to around 11th grade, for religious reasons of course. My Jehovah's Witness parents felt like education was kind of irrelevant in this system of things, so what I needed to know could be taught by life. And there were some other underlying reasons relating to my dad, but I'm not going to get into that right now. Long story short, I ended up going back to public school in 11th grade, and of course I didn't learn shit for the entirety of the 4 years I was out, so they put me back in 10th grade. It turned out to be the best thing that ever happened to me because it exposed me to the real world. I was completely sheltered for that entire period of my life. I didn't have any friends, I didn't communicate with anybody because I wasn't allowed to, being Jehovah's Witness. So homeschooling hits home with me. Here are the requirements for homeschooling a child in my state. The person providing the instruction shall annually obtain an academic assessment of the child for the previous school year. So the kid has to take a yearly test. It can either be an approved standardized test, participating in the state's testing program, a written narrative indicating that a portfolio of samples of the child's work has been reviewed by a certified teacher, which basically means a teacher has to write up a little essay saying that they reviewed the child's work and it was legit, or evidence of an alternative assessment of the child's proficiency. I remember taking a few of these standardized tests, but it really wasn't enough. I'd just sit there all day and all night with nothing to do for years, and once a year I'd take a test. The test wasn't terribly hard either, and I'd already learned all of the material from 6th and part of 7th grade in public school, and I was taking tests for 10th grade homeschoolers. So needless to say, there's almost no regulation on private schools or homeschooling in the US. It's a serious problem. There are approximately 5.4 million students of religious schools and 1.7 million homeschool students in the US, out of a total of 323.1 million US citizens. Of course, not every homeschooler is being homeschooled for religious reasons, but even estimating low, that is an unacceptably high number of kids who are getting subpar education, if any education at all. I talked to some subscribers about the top 3 worst things about going to a religious private school. I've boiled it down to a few specific points. Here's what they had to say. 1. No sex ed. That is a big problem. They think kids will just figure it out on their own when the time comes. And that's true to an extent. People will figure it out. But sex ed isn't intended to explain the physical operation of it. It's intended to teach kids how to be safe, how to prevent teen pregnancy or unwanted pregnancy in general, how to protect themselves from STDs, and a number of other useful lessons. It's appalling that people are pushing to completely remove the discussion around this. It's killing people, literally killing people. They can either have no abortion or no comprehensive sex ed, not both. But they don't want abortion and they don't want sex ed. Well, that's fine, but they have to understand that abortion rates are going to go up in areas without comprehensive sex ed classes, whether they like it or not. And they aren't going to prevent abortions from happening. Even if it's going to be in a back alley, people will find a way if they're determined enough. I don't want abortion. Nobody wants abortion. But it's a fact of life. It's going to happen. So let's regulate it and let's prevent it by preventing pregnancy in the first place. Or is that a sin too? Number 2, a strict uniform policy. Girls have to wear knee-length skirts and they can't wear nail polish or have earrings. I'm assuming that's because they don't want the girls to dress like harlots. It's pushing this idea that women must keep a certain demeanor about them, and they're to blame if somebody's attracted to them. They shouldn't have dressed that way if they didn't want that kind of attention. And to that I say, what about the men? The men are all out there gelling up their hair and wearing trendy clothes. Seems to me like they're the harlots. If they didn't want girls to think they were attractive, then they shouldn't have dressed the way they did. They should dress like garbage every day so nobody gets the wrong impression. 3. They're obsessed with gender roles. The boys take out the trash. Only the boys are allowed to do that. Boys always have to hold the doors open for girls. They're called rude if they don't. Of course, they have prayer before lunch and breakfast, and all of the teachers are anti-gay and pro-life. Somehow, everything always gets circled back around to God. How did the dinosaurs get here? God. How long have people lived on Earth? 6,000 years. When did Noah's flood happen? 4,000 years ago. Even in history and science classes, like I said, there are 0 regulations on what they can and can't say in classes. It's like going to church 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's indoctrination to the fullest extent, and it has to stop. This kind of shit has to be regulated more closely. I believe that all children should be required to get an education equivalent or better than the one they'd receive in public schools. And if a school wants to exempt kids from going to a public school, they have to follow the same laws a public school would, like keeping religion out of it. I don't care if you want to send the kids to a religious school for 8 hours a day, but they should have to spend the first 8 hours of that day in a school dedicated to delivering a fact-based education. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. Don't forget to check out Godless Engineer.
Thank you, Telltale, for allowing me to come on today and give you my 2 cents on this issue, and I guess I will see you heathens over on the Godless Engineer channel.
Thanks for being here, and don't forget to subscribe to both of us. Links are in the description, and there should be an annotation in the video here to get to his channel. And one more thing, I have a Discord now. I'm putting that link in the description too. Thanks for watching.